right? And a lot of business owners aren't willing to listen. They think that they have all the answers. The ones that realize they have none of the answers are the ones that are always seeking them. And I found really throughout my career is that if I just listened to people around me, I would find really great ideas that either were ready to go or maybe needed a little bit massaging to put into to implement in action. But if you listen, you can get a lot of great insights.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders in Tech podcast, where we're shining the light on technology leaders that are making this world a better place with their people, inspiring to make new technologies for the companies they're working with. Today we have with us Bradley. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Next Level Catapult. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So Next Level Catapult is a management consulting firm. We really focus on helping family-run and family of founder-run companies grow through improving and upskilling existing talent, through identifying new ways to improve effectiveness and efficiency, and implement new innovation and new ideas within their organization.
That is beautiful. So how long have you been working for them?
So we've been around for about 3 years. I've been here for about half that time.
About a year and a half. And give me your full name and where are you located? Because, I never like to do introductions for my leaders. I think it's better it comes out of the person's mouth.
Yeah, so no one ever gets my name right. It's a very unusual name. So Brad Hajart. I'm located in just outside New York City.
So you say HR? Because
Hajart, it's a Bavarian name, though I have a lot of people, Bavarians, who will argue that, but my family's originally from Bavaria many generations ago, and there's still a few Hajarts banging around in that area.
That's wonderful. Brad, what are you doing for Next Level Catapult?
So I'm the general manager. I oversee the day-to-day business and ensure that all of our coaches and consultants are well supported in delivering, our different client projects. And then I specifically handle a lot of the sales and marketing and technology based clients and projects. That's kind of my background. Most of my career is spent in those spaces. So I'll handle a lot of those sales and marketing and tech based clients.
One of the reasons why I was happy to do your interview is because it's very rare to have a person with the three skills. Sales, marketing, and technology, they don't go together. I mean, sales and marketing go together, but it's really a different segment. But technology, I mean, I've been my whole life, I've been spending helping people do better sales and marketing and process automation with technology with my companies. But you're doing this for a single company. Tell me a little bit more about that. How are you doing that together?
Yeah. So, my background's a little unusual. Most of my career, or at least the first half of my career, was spent in advertising. I was on the creative side, developing campaign work for big global brands, worked at large ad agencies around the country, and eventually found myself working client side on behalf of a brand. And then I started my own agency. That agency evolved into a digital technology-centric marketing firm. So I really started tapping into that technology experience very early in my career. And then, of course, when you own a business, you have to kind of learn how to sell. And so just by the needs of the business, I had to kind of put my sales hat on. And then everywhere I've gone, what I've noticed as I sold that business and then later led that kind of combined company, and then we transacted that business. But what I found as different stops along the way is that there's a lot of synergies between those three aspects of the business, because all three are trying to tell a story. It's just they're telling a story from a different perspective, right? Marketing is trying to tell the brand story. Sales is trying to tell the corporate story, and technology is trying to ensure that story is easily accessible, easily digestible, and easily shareable. And so I found that kind of in all three of those roles, there's a lot of commonality, much more than you would think. And then with the kind of conversion of advertising and technology in the last decade, where AdTech and MarTech are where most of the growth is in the marketing space, you're finding technologists that have a marketer's mind. And when you can kind of bring in that sales mentality, especially any entrepreneur is going to be a salesperson at heart, even if their domain expertise is somewhere else. Those three kind of expertise can very often overlap nowadays, when you really wouldn't find that a decade ago. And I really see that as much more common, but also it's kind of proven that you can be good in all three of those areas, where before, like it wasn't as easy to kind of step out of your lane. If you were a marketer, you were excluded from the sales conversations, and the same goes for technology. And I think as the industry has kind of accepted that there's more overlap in those areas, you have more exposure to all three of those spaces at the same time. And so you're going to have a lot more people who are experts across those three domains. And so I think it's becoming much more common. And I see in a lot of the clients that we support, in particular, their sales and marketing teams are very interwoven. They collaborate very effectively, and technology has had more experience collaborating and connecting with the marketing side, maybe not quite as much with the sales side, but that's starting to change as well now, with just every sales team has to be using a CRM. They have to have, they have several, if not dozens of different sales prospecting technologies that they're using. So, even salespeople have had to become more technologically savvy and more attuned as to how to integrate technology into their day-to-day role. So you're seeing a lot more of that expertise across all three of those areas.
Are you familiar with ClickFunnels?
Yes.
Russell Brunson? This was the first guy that I met. This is back in 2017, I think. It's the first guy that I met that was a beautiful merge between custom tech software with really, really heavy lead generation marketing. Because ultimately marketing is to do lead generation, but you have brand awareness, you have PR, you have lead generation. This kid, when he's not a kid anymore, but this guy, he really focused himself on creating something that will produce leads and 100% based in technology. What's your experience with that?
Well, on the B2B side, most of my career was spent on consumer marketing early on. And then the first half was all consumer marketing. And I only really started working on the B2B side, like lead gen side, in the last, maybe 10 years. And there's a lot of really interesting principles that come from consumer marketing. But they, historically haven't been focused on performance. And so it was really hard to kind of it was a change of mindset to move from consumer to B2B and looking just at lead gen and performance marketing. But with the growth of e-commerce in the last, 10 or 15 years, even the consumer side of the business is obsessed with performance marketing, right? Like focus on mid and lower funnel activity, driving leads, driving conversions. And so I think there's a lot more of commonality between consumer and B2B marketers, nowadays. And so with that said, though, there's certain things that, B2B experts are significantly better than their friends on the consumer side. And in particular, account-based marketing, things that are account-based marketing can be very simple, but can also be exceptionally complex, right? With the idea of trying to target a single individual and lead score those engagements and start to build brand awareness, which obviously you have exposure to on the consumer side, but you're now marketers on the B2B side see the value of upper funnel activity, but all with the goal of driving you down into the funnel, right? It's there for a very intentional reason of making sure that your lower funnel, your mid and lower funnel messaging is more effective. And so I think what you see that now is that B2B marketers are way more disciplined than consumer marketers, because they have to prove every single dollar spent is driving a lead, and that those leads are ultimately driving real revenue at a reasonable period of time. And technology has made that easier to measure. It's also made it easier for the leadership within an organization to monitor, right? So marketers are being held accountable. much more closely than they ever were in the past. And so I think what I've seen, and we see this with all of our clients that we're working with in the marketing world, is that they're held accountable. They embrace that accountability. They're leaning into technology to make sure that they are accountable, and they're making really smart decisions, particularly in how messaging and content is converting, right? Whether it's content on your website or an email or an ad campaign or paid social, they're spending a lot of time focused on that, like that last mile of a click, getting someone to click and then drive the right type of post-click behavior. And so I've been really impressed to see how B2B marketers have really embraced that idea of accountability that's kind of lacking in the consumer marketing side, right? The accountability is for those big fluffy metrics of brand awareness and, impressions where,
and how many views?
Yeah, exactly.
Who cares about the views if you don't close a sale, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, when those fluffy metrics no longer are being monitored by leadership, then you're really, and they're instead focused on the actual sales and revenue that you're contributing, then it's you truly are being held accountable, and you have to ensure that where you're spending is actually driving return. And it kind of goes back to your question earlier, is sales and marketing and technology coming together. It's a big reason why is because with those three things coming together, it's allowed for transparency and accountability on the marketing side. It's also allowed for some transparency on the sales side. So if you are creating an MQL or marketing qualified lead, is that really being nurtured into a sales qualified lead in the right way, right? Because the marketer is the one that's, is being measured just as much as the salesperson is on the quality of that lead and whether it's converting. So, technology has made that easier to do, made it easier to manage across those two different domains. And so you see just people obsessed with performance on the B2B side, and where they can really measure every single little dollar and every little bit of impact that they've made.
I consider myself a person with so much blessing because my flagship company, my biggest company, is going to be 19 years old this May, in a couple of weeks. And I have made every single mistake any entrepreneur or any technologist could make. Because basically I was the software architect that wanted to have a business, and I had no idea about business, especially marketing and sales. I mean, I grew up in the corporate world. I supported the fluffy marketers. I also supported the B2B marketers. But because I was just a leader in technology, and my applications and my team was performing to the standards of what the business wanted, I never cared about going deeper into what was it that they were doing.
Yeah.
And later on, I regretted it because when I launched my company in 2005, I thought I was ready. I wasn't ready. I launched a B2B software consulting company that needed clients. And all I had at the beginning was word of mouth and my reputation as a leader in technology working for multinationals. But that only got me so far, and I had to learn the hard way. I spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on brand awareness. And by the way, it helped, but it wasn't bringing in the clients. I was still networking myself. When I hired my first marketing and sales guy, another mistake, I thought the marketing guy was the sales guy. So, we were going to conferences, and I spent literally millions of dollars going on planes and conferences all over North America to get my next clients. It was a hard way to sell. I'm here still. But the biggest lesson for me was that, number one, I needed to be a good leader in technology to support sales and marketing. And number two, I needed to be a good business owner to realize that marketing and sales are different things. And B2B marketing is completely different than B2C marketing.
Look, every entrepreneur that's had success has funded their education through failures. And I was when I started my agency, I was young enough. I was so young, I didn't know how bad of an idea it was to be a business owner. And that blindness was probably what allowed me to sustain those first few years and get through the really painful, hard times. If you've never started a business from scratch, on your own dime, without, outside VC funding, you don't know how hard every single, hour that you spend in the business really is for the first few years, because you're always under resourced. You're always, trying to keep the wheels on while you build the car. So, it's a great learning experience. It's a humbling experience. And, even marketers like me didn't figure out the sales and marketing part of promoting my business till at least year two. It took me time of trial and error to figure out what's the right way to generate business. Because even though, look, there's a million ad agencies out there, right? When I launched my digital agency, there was lots and lots of little agencies popping up in New York City, and everyone was kind of saying the same thing. And it took me time to figure out how does my personality, how does my expertise, how does our existing client roster, how do all those things kind of coalesce to find the right sales story and the right marketing story to generate leads. And we were at it for 2 years, to trying to figure out what's that right mix. And then we slowly figured it out. And once we figured it out, once we hit upon that right story, then things really started to cascade and build and became so much easier for us to figure out who is our right ICP, right? Who's our right ideal customer, and then how to engage them through marketing and through sales efforts. We were swinging in the dark for the first couple of years on who our ICP was. We had lots of different theses on who it could be, and none of them proved to be right until we were a couple of years in.
Tell me, Brad, what was in your mind to open your own business to begin with? What was that process like? What did you do before that?
Well, clearly there wasn't a lot in my mind if I thought that was a good idea. But at the time, I did some soul searching. I'd been around in a few agencies. I had went in-house to a premium cigar brand for a couple of years, and I was doing some soul searching, trying to figure out what do I like about advertising and marketing? What do I dislike about it? And what we learned, what I thought, what really hit me was I really liked servicing the underdog. I liked working on the brands that had a hard road ahead of them and didn't always have the right resources, right? Because that's been my entire life. I've always kind of felt I was a bit of the underdog. And so I really gravitated toward those brands. But when you're in an agency or on the brand side, you don't really get an opportunity to work on those brands. They're brands that agencies ignore. And if you're owned by a larger brand, manufacturer, those little brands just get ignored. And so, I said, well, how do I find an opportunity to do that when if I just go somewhere else to another agency, I'm not gonna find an opportunity to work on those kind of brands. So that's what inspired me to start my own agency, is to focus on brands like that. And it took a couple of years to narrow down, okay, who really is a decision maker within those types of brands? What are the types of categories that really make sense? What are the service mix that makes sense? Like, we had to completely reinvent our service mix over the first 2 years to find the services that were most advantageous for these challenger brands, what we call them. So we kind of coined these companies challenger brands. That has become more of a common term now. When we started using it 20 years ago, no one had ever really heard of challenger brands. They're like, oh, that's a cool way of saying underdog. And so that's what really inspired me, is an opportunity to work on those little underdog challenger brands and drive some meaningful change to them, and also have a bigger stake in the business, have a bigger stake in turning a brand around. Because when you work for a big company, the ability to turn a business around and make a real meaningful impact to business is exceptionally difficult. I've worked at multiple, multi-billion-dollar companies with hundreds of thousands of employees, publicly traded in a senior executive role. And even though I had thousands of people rolling into me, I couldn't really make a big impact in that business. It's just too big. It takes an army of people like me to make even the littlest of changes. So this was an opportunity really to drive meaningful change for brands that didn't really have a lot of other options out there.
Yeah, Brad, it's so beautiful that you mentioned that This is one of the reasons why I started my own company myself. Remember, like I was a tech guy. I started to code when I was 16 years old, but not like the kids today. Like, well, I was 16 years old in the 80s. In the 80s, like nobody had computers, like, and I was like this kid that fell in love with computers. And this is exactly what happened to me, Brad. I remember when I started in corporate, well, first I thought I'm going to college, I'm going to get my computer science degree, I'm going to become a professional developer, and I'm going to be a consultant. I'm going to write software for companies. Nobody wanted to trust a kid fresh out of school with their software. So I ended up having to sell hardware in order to pay the rent and make ends meet, because I actually got myself into business. And it was horrible. At the end of the 2 years, my wife was supporting my house, not myself. I was losing money every day. But I actually had a lot of brand awareness, and I developed about 1,000 people in my customer database, because everybody that was selling the computers to, I was really servicing them properly. I knew how to place ads in newspapers back then. I just found out of, you know what it is? It's faith and destiny. So I'm a man of faith. I'm a born-again Christian, and I've been following Jesus since I was 16 years old. And when I found myself trapped because I couldn't sell my software services, I took a big loan from the bank backed by the government. The government of Canada wanted to push people to open internet companies. This is 1995. So they were like backing banks' loans with government money in case somebody went bankrupt after they opened their company. So I was one of those graduates. I went to a 1-year MBA-like course after college, and they taught me sales, marketing, accounting. But what can you learn in 1 year? Yeah. So I thought I was ready. No, man, like I almost went dead. But anyways, because I found myself trapped that I didn't know what to do because I wasn't bringing in any money and I was paying rent and all this, I put a little ad in a newspaper and we started selling computers, and I was ensembling computers. Back then, people were doing clones. But it was very popular. So I did the clone wave. I sold over 1,000 computers in those 2 years, but I was losing money every month because I couldn't even cover my cost. But I had a big Rolodex. People were happy, and the brand had a lot of awareness, and I didn't know because I knew nothing about marketing. So when I sold the company, I sold it for the amount of debt that I had, and that was a miracle. I was actually literally crying. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go bankrupt. I owed not only what I owed to the bank on that business loan, but on top of that, all my credit cards were maxed out. And one day, this guy comes in from one of my interns. So I had this internship in the summer for kids that wanted to learn how to build computers. This kid became in love with the business, and he brought his dad, that was a multi-millionaire. One day he came and he says, "We want to buy your business," out of the blue. And he said, "How much money do you want for it?" Remember, I was like 25 years old back then, right? And this senior business guy asked me this question, and I knew exactly how much money I needed to get out of debt, right? Because I was trying to do that. That was my biggest pressure. And I said, how about I think it was $30,000, $50,000 back then, which is, it's about $300,000 of today's money. And he said, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, oh my God, he's going to say no, right? Maybe it's too much money. But I said, if I say less, I'm still in trouble, right? So yeah, I'm sure. He asked me 3 times, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. Okay, not turning back. And he wrote the check without writing the contract. He wrote the check first, he gave it to me, and then he wrote the contract to buy the business out. And I was so blessed. I felt such a relief. Little did I know that many years later, after I became a professional business owner, that my company had 10 times that money worth just by the brand, because everybody knew me in town. I was a popular company in town already. I had built the brand, and I didn't know.
Yeah. Every time you sell your first company, you usually sell it for far less than it's worth. And it's the most expensive education you'll ever get, is selling that first business.
It's incredible because I was so desperate, Brad. when I saw my wife, we have 2 kids already. They were little kids, and she was having to babysit and work and pay rent, and I felt so pressured, and I felt worthless because I wasn't bringing in the revenue to support the family. And then when that came in, it was so beautiful that when I got my first professional job as a developer, I did everything I could to make them happy because I was so grateful, you see? And that was part of my big success later on in life. But going back to the marketing and sales thing, one of the most important lessons that I learned there is that without marketing, you couldn't have a business. That was clear to me. And I didn't know how to do business to business marketing because what I was trying to sell is software services. What I ended up selling is business to consumer. I was selling computers to normal people. I mean, to the masses, to the population. Yeah. For you, I'm going to say something. People think that a lot of companies get bought and sold, and it's just an illusion. If you look at the market and how many people really happens to sell their business, it's very few. Most companies go bankrupt. 80% of the companies go bankrupt within 2 years. The companies that make it to 10 years are like unicorns because they almost don't exist. They are like dinosaurs. And companies that actually get sold is a fraction of that. So how do you manage to sell your first business?
Well, and let me add one more thing to that statistic is those businesses that transition from one generation to the next generation, more than 50% of those fail. So there's really very few options for exiting the business, at least that happen in a broad and consistent way. I think I got really lucky. I was really focused on networking and building my network as big as humanly possible within our competitive market, right? Looking at other adjacent marketing service agencies and companies and just trying to build my network. And not necessarily because I was expecting to sell it. I sold my company way before I was actually expecting to sell. But I started building my network because I knew that they can provide a referral source. They can offer, a good network can offer mentorship when you're trying to address business challenges. And then ultimately one day it's going to be the pipeline for how you transact your business, right? Whether it's someone in your network buying or someone that's connected to your network hearing about, a business for sale and entertaining that. Now today, private equity has really taken a lot of those transactions off the table. So there's not as many strategics buying businesses now as there used to be. But I built my network for that reason. And it was someone in my network who started to, we started to partner with on some projects. And the CEO of this company realized that we were winning a lot of business together between our two companies. We were pitching together and winning together. And it just made so much sense to combine our expertises. And so, right after a client pitch, we had just been awarded a very large piece of business. And she said, "Hey, I'm going to buy your business." I said, "Well, it's not for sale." And she said, "Well, that's just details." And after enough heavy-handed pestering, she convinced me it was the right idea, and it was the right idea. It was the right thing to do for the business. It was the right thing to do for my family. You mentioned, your wife earlier. Most people think that your coworkers and your business partners have the biggest impact on whether your business is successful. I think it's your spouse. I think it's your spouse and your family being there, being supportive, making room when they need to make room for, the business challenges, right? Because there's sometimes when, doesn't matter what's happening, you've got a problem and you have to pick up the phone and deal with it, or jump on the computer and deal with it. And it takes a great relationship and a great partner to say, "Hey, this isn't, they're not ignoring me. They're trying to address a business challenge, which is really important for our family." And so, having a spouse there that support you it's really critical. Without that, you're never going to make it, or it's going to be exceptionally hard to make it. So, I think networking, go back and build your network. It's the best way to ultimately get enough people of interest to so that when it's time to sell, you got a starting point. You can't rely on private equity. So many companies try to go to market and bring in a banker. And there's some great bankers out there. I'm an advisor to STS Capital. We do sell side advisory. There's a lot of great providers out there. They're just not always companies willing to buy. And there's certain categories which are exceptionally difficult to sell, if not impossible to sell. So you gotta make sure that you're building something that's sellable, and then have a network that you can use to market that once you're ready to sell.
You're so right. You're so completely right. One of the things that I admire is when I hear people like you, being successful in New York City. I want to say why. If you remember Frank Sinatra, when he wrote that song about New York City, he says, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. He wasn't kidding.
No.
People think that New York, because of the size of the city and how big it is and how much business there is there, people think it's easy to actually break through that market. And it's the hardest thing in the world because the level of competition is so high and they are so efficient that you really, really, really have to be to the next level. Like if you make it in New York City, you can go to any other city in the world, and you will be successful. How do you figure that out? How do you manage that? Or is it just because you were born there?
So I'm actually not from New York originally. I'm from Texas, and this is why I kind of consider myself a little bit of an underdog. I grew up on a ranch in the middle of Texas, East Texas, a little town just outside a little town called Longview. But I grew up a Yankees fan. Don Mattingly was my hero in baseball growing up, and it was always kind of my dream to move here. And I had an opportunity relatively early in my career to move here. But you're right, New York is exceptionally difficult. It's hard because there are so many businesses here. There's so much competition. Prices are exceptionally high, not just for talent, but just operating a business. There's so many taxes and fees that you don't even think about that are going to impact you when you're starting a business up here. Vendors, every service you can imagine is more expensive than virtually anywhere else in the country. So it's from a cost standpoint, from a profitability standpoint, it's really hard to build a business that's gonna be profitable here in New York City. The other side of it is everyone wants to be here. Everyone wants to work here. So there's so many companies that are encroaching in this market, right? Maybe they don't have a New York office, but they set up something in the general vicinity, and they're trying to poach some of that business into their business. And so there's just so much competition. At the same time, like there's really driven people here. You'll find harder workers in New York than virtually anywhere else in the country. I would literally put the work ethic of a New York City person up against any other state in the U.S. So I think you get that high work ethic, you get that high productivity that's invaluable to starting a business. You also get a lot of innovation, a lot of people who think differently and are on the kind of the bleeding edge of new thinking and new ideas, whether that's in your sector or somewhere else in their life, but those influences are brought into the business. And so you have innovation and ideas coming from a lot of different parts of your company if you're just willing to listen, right? And a lot of business owners aren't willing to listen. They think that they have all the answers. The ones that realize they have none of the answers are the ones that are always seeking them. And I found really throughout my career is that if I just listened to people around me, I would find really great ideas that either were ready to go or maybe needed a little bit massaging to put into to implement in action. But if you listen, you can get a lot of great insights from the brilliant people that live and work here in this market. And so I think if you use the strengths of this market, it can help you overcome the weaknesses, which really is the cost. It's just exceptionally expensive and exceptionally competitive here.
It still boggles my mind, how can people choose to do business in an environment like that? But then you go down, I've been to New York City many times, and it's almost like once you go there, you don't want to leave. It's so weird because it's full of traffic. People don't necessarily are nice to each other because there are so many people living there that they just mind their own business like robots. I remember going out of the train station because one day I went for a conference and I was taking the train from Newark into Manhattan. And when I got off the train station, there was so many people that I thought, and they were all walking towards the same door, right? I thought, these people are not even talking to each other. Like, it was quiet and it was thousands and thousands of people. So I thought, I wonder if I stay still, will they push me? Will they like, and I stood still there for 10 minutes on purpose. And people were just like avoiding me like this. Like, I bet if you see it from an angle high above, you will actually see the conversions, like how people will go out and go back in again.
Yeah.
And it almost like I didn't exist. It was such a weird feeling. Even in the train, I was noticing, and they were like, people were writing their payments, they were on their computers. Nobody was talking to each other. I'm like, what is going on here? Yeah. I mean, I'm from Toronto. I mean, I live close to Toronto, about an hour away by car. And Torontonians are kind of like that, but not as much. Like, there is still more connectivity between people. But remember, like, Toronto probably has 1/10 of the population of New York City, right?
Yeah. Well, you don't, people always say that you're not a New Yorker until you run into someone by accident that you know. And it took me, I think, 2 years I was living here before I ran into someone I knew, like just on a subway one day. It's such a big city. There's so much going on here. There's so many people. There's so many people that are in and out, like that move in and move out. And so the population is always refreshing. You build strong connections within your social group and your professional group, but you also live you could live 10 blocks away and probably never see each other. You live 2 blocks away and probably never see each other. So it's just such a big city with so many people that, we get used to kind of living in our own world. You mentioned like sitting on a train and paying bills and reading the books. Like, you kind of have to create your own little world to be able to maintain some level of sanity here. So it's not uncommon. It's not surprising at all.
Incredible. Brad, it's been 40 minutes already. This was so much fun. And it's such a refreshing episode for the leaders in technology. And I know we didn't talk much about technology except the technology around marketing. But one of the things that leaders in technology need to know and implement is that they are there to support sales and marketing at the end of the day. Because without sales, there's no business. And that includes, of course, production support. Regardless of what kind of business you are, you have production, then you have marketing, and then ultimately you have sales. And IT, technology has to support the entire ecosystem with a clear mindset that if you don't make a profit when you sell, you die. Even if you're a non-for-profit. I have interviewed leaders in technology for quite a few non-for-profits, and they're still having that accountability in mind, because this fact that they don't make money doesn't mean that they don't need to get the money to deliver whatever it is that they're delivering. And technology is a focal point in that.
Yeah.
But what we talked about here was fantastic. Marketing, sales, technology. Thank you so much for your time, Bradley. I'm going to ask you one last question before we finish. If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway in the entire world, what would you write on it?
Oh, man. That's a tough one. I'd probably be a message of harmony. And I wouldn't even be thinking about my business, to be honest. I'd be thinking about, how can the world maybe not beat each other's throats so much. So I'd probably quickly tap into ChatGPT and come up with a witty line about people getting along in harmony instead of having to write it myself. But I'd probably think more about making the world a little more enjoyable, have a little more togetherness, and then I'll worry about promoting my business somewhere else.
When in the Old Testament, when God gave the laws to Moses, first there were the 10 Commandments. By the way, the U.S. Constitution and and the United States of America is built on the 10 Commandments. So is Canada. People forget that. And that's why they are so prosperous. There is actually a blessing when you respect the 10 Commandments. But then after that, for the dispensation or the era where it was written, for the people of Israel, there were a whole bunch more laws that were written that they should live, even the way they should wear their beard, or the ladies, how they should dress, what they will eat. So it's like hundreds of instructions. When Jesus came to the world, I don't know how long it was, but it was thousands of years after that. They were asked, what is the most important commandment out of all these things? Because what he did is he came to abolish all the regulations. He only kept the 10 Commandments and he made them even more strong. Like he said, even if you think bad about a lady, you already committed adultery, for example, because he knew the battle was in the mind. But he said, when he was asked, out of all the commandments, what is the most important one? And then he said, there is only 2 commandments that you need to follow. And if you follow these 2, the entire Bible is included in these 2. And he said, number 1, love your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. And number 2, this is what you wanted to put on your billboard. Love your brother and sister as you love yourself. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's living in harmony. That's thinking, if I don't want what I'm about to do to this person to be done to me, I'm not going to do it.
Yep.
Right? If people were only had that level of respect in the world, we will live in such a much better world. Even with the mistakes we make, but if intentionally you are trying to actually do good to everybody else, even though you don't know them. I came from a country that back then it was so dangerous that people will actually kill each other for stealing a parking lot. Like there were several cases where people, got into a parking lot that was waiting for somebody else, and this person will grab a gun and kill the other person. That's how bad it got in here in the 90s, in the country I was born. And I'm like, when I moved to Canada, that was the first thing that I noticed. People were so nice to each other. They were respectful to each other. And then, the United States of America was the same way. We're kind of losing our ways now. But for the most part, we're still very respectful people trying to do good to each other. That's why these 2 countries are so prosperous. Like we have the privilege of living in the most prosperous area in the entire world with freedom. Because there might be another countries, especially oil-rich countries, that maybe there is more prosperity there, but you don't have freedom. Your freedom is very limited. So there you go. If you want a billboard that says, be kind to each other, just say, love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Yeah, I'll take that from you.
Brad, thank you so much for your time. If people like to follow you or hire your services, where can they find you?
Our website is nextlevelcatapult.com. There's contact forms. All of our services are on there. And if anyone's interested, love to have a conversation. Are you on LinkedIn so people can ask questions? I'm in LinkedIn, yep. So Brad Hajart, B-R-A-D, Hajart is H-A-J-A-R-T. Fantastic. Brad, thank you so much for your time. God bless you and have a beautiful rest of the week. All right, thanks, you too. Great. Thanks for having me. Cheers, Brad.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leaders in Tech podcast. Check in next week to keep learning how to use technology and leadership to change the game. See you next time.